This is a thought experiment. Let me tell you actually what this is not. This is not anything at all definitive. If anything, it's a question that leads to more questions that may end up being a giant nothing burger. I don't know. That is up for you to decide. I struggled for a long time in determining what exactly even to name this video or this sort of exercise in thought, and I don't even know where to begin, so I guess I'll start with my original line of thought, and we'll go from there. This community, or any community, I guess, anytime you involve people, there's this competitive nature that sometimes happens surrounding ideas. And I'm never one to even pretend that any idea is original. I sometimes don't know where ideas come from. Sometimes they're things you've heard before and you don't even know that you have heard them before. Sometimes they're original. So I can't claim it's an original thought. I truly don't have the answer. And to me, it's besides the point. But the thought occurred to me somehow, some way. There are a great many of these buildings that we suspect may have something to do with energy in some way. There's an extraordinary amount of them that have this sort of red and white striped theme. And when I compare that to modern times, I think of the radio tower, the modern day antenna. And what we're told is that this red and white striped motif is for airplanes, so that they remain visible, and admittedly that is plausible. But that doesn't explain why so many buildings in the pre-airplane era would have such a motif. Now, to play devil's advocate, you could say, well, it just so happens that bricks are red primarily, and then to do the trim is concrete or plaster or stucco. These things are often whitish in color, and it just by default alternating red and white sequence. Certainly it isn't for looks. In fact, I remember the news, a woman who painted her house red and white striped in protest of some restrictions that her neighborhood was putting on her, and the neighbors were outraged. In some posh neighborhood in London, they were outraged that this garish red and white striped home would be in the midst of such classy domiciles as they owned. And also recall Madonna making headlines for painting her house red and white striped, her being no stranger to outlandish attention-grabbing. So I set off to find how many of these temples or churches or monasteries were red and white, and if there seemed something odd about it. Now, keep in mind, many buildings, plastered over, and often the brick is hidden. So is it just a coincidence that it's just the bricks are red and trim is white, and it's just a coincidence that alternating these colors is everywhere? I really don't know, but I find that there are way too many of them that have this rather striking motif, and you just can't help but wonder if it's something we carried down through the ages, making things red and white without understanding where it initially came from. So that's how this thought experiment began. I thought, what is the significance of this? You see sometimes venomous snakes have this sort of pattern to catch your attention. And so is this the equivalent of a modern day electric box sort of warning? I don't know. This one's in Bulgaria. This is in Australia, and they're all over the world. Here's one in South Africa that has the modern day radio tower, red and white. This is in our mosque in Armenia. I mean, it looks very candy cane-ish to be taken seriously. In Italy, this is also in Bulgaria. And one can't help but notice that they sort of stand out and are similar, at least, in the motif. This is Angola, a lighthouse in Australia, a lighthouse in Barbados. This is a Church of Abbey. Back here you have in Belarus this chimney painted this way. Of course, that might have something to do with low-flying airplanes. This is in Belgium, Russia, Brazil, Belarus. This is in Africa, Comoros, castles in Belarus, tower in China, Ecuador, and it does share the sort of clown-like sensibilities that some of these buildings have. This one is in Egypt, Albania, even you can see faded, but red and white nonetheless at one point. This is in Minnesota, this radio tower. And even if you exclude the ones where it's simply red brick with white trim, you still have a large number of, from Russia to Brazil, towers that shows this. This is also in Bulgaria as well. This is in China. A building in Australia here, the Palace Hotel. This is in the Bahamas. This is the striped marble columns in Siena. This is in Argentina. In Croatia. Okay, this is the home I was referencing earlier that was really pissed off all these neighbors and made headlines about this person painting their house like this in protest of some restriction they were given, and everyone was so angry. So based on that, you can tell if red and white striped isn't considered a look of beauty or elegance. In fact, almost always it's very industrial when you have striped poles that are, draped across traffic barricades, for example, and obviously radio towers. And you see this sort of motif happening all over the world. So is there a reason why Chinese cathedrals look like this? Is this a relic of the past where these were power stations or having to do with electricity, and they were obviously letting us know this is the case, and we just have sort of forgotten this over time and or carried it on subconsciously through the radio towers of today? I'm not certain. I mean, this is what started this. This is in Australia. This is in Egypt, Bosnia. This one is in Brazil. This is an Australian government house. Back in China, another one. Bulgaria. And many of these buildings that looked like they were, we suspect this is in Azerbaijan, were perhaps old power plants or something to do with power. This is in Canada. I should have labeled these, but this is Taiwan. This is in England. Here's a radio tower in Germany. In Belgium, in Canada, in the UK again. This is in Chile, Belgium, and on it goes. And so this is what led me here initially. Azerbaijan has them. This is in Croatia. And I mean, we could do this all day. I literally have hundreds and hundreds of pictures that have this sort of thing on them. This is in Belgium also, Czech Republic, Bulgaria again, Croatia, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Canada. And at first I know this might seem silly, but once you realize how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds there are that are and these are the ones that are not covered over in different that haven't been rebuilt or restructured or recoded, resurfaced. These are ones that haven't been repainted. And can you imagine what underneath, how many of them might actually look like this if you remove the top coat? It begins to be a little overwhelming. This was in Benin. I don't know what designer would do this. I really don't. And I doubt it has anything to do with flying planes, considering most of these buildings are very ancient. This is in France. This is Estonia, Bosnia, Georgia, Bangladesh, Azerbaijan. This is Belgium. This is Belgium. This is Croatia, Botswana, Australia. This is in Denmark. Denmark as well. Chile, Bosnia, Egypt, Estonia, Albania, and on and on. Well, this thought process actually brought me to another very familiar red and white striped object, and that is, of course, the barbershop pole. Always an interesting thing that barbers would have their own sort of symbol, and you can see that the concept has been adapted over the years, but it's usually always the same. We have a bulb on the top and an upward striped pole, usually red and white. But the old ones, and you can see these are these sort of non-mechanical ones. Sometimes they would paint, parking pylons to signify it and drag it over in front of their store in America. All of these different efforts here to retain the original symbol, which was a little bit different than this by all measures. It was more like this, where you had two parts that spun different directions, and the middle piece here and a bulb on the top. And you see this emulated, of course, in various ways throughout the years by various barbers that sort of are broadcasting what they are, because it became known as this. And the official story is kind of funny regarding the barbershop pole. We're told in just about 1 million documents, almost every time it's ever mentioned in any fiction book, it's almost eerily the same sentence, where it goes something like this. A character or someone is looking over a cityscape and they see a red and white striped pole, which was widely known to indicate that the store belonged to that of a barber. Because as legend goes, barbers, along with surgeons, were the only ones allowed to do any bloodletting. And so, according to legend, the surgeon or barber would have a pole out front with a red and white stripe and a basin underneath it, and the red indicated blood dripping down the arm of the patient, and the basin indicated how it was collected back when they used to do bloodletting. And this is the official story behind how barbershop pole became to indicate this is because there was a bloody arm essentially represented by this pole. Yet the doctor at the time, who also was allowed to do bloodletting, there is no such symbol. It's very odd. This leads me to also down the path of thinking about the word barber, the close association it would have with, to me, my brain jumps to barbarian. I'm sure there's actually a closer tie into is the word for beard in Spanish, or barba. In Latin, I think the word is barbe. But this barber shop, which often we equate barber as being sort of the other half of the empire as the Tartars. You have Barbaria, you have Tartaria. Two empires that are essentially early America went to war against. I mean, the Barbary Wars were the very first event that we actually went to war with, allegedly these North African pirates. And then you have the name barbarian, which is now used in a derogatory fashion to imply some sort of native, wild person, uncouth, unkempt, uncivilized. And in the east, you have the Tartars, or Tartary, which that word also, you have Tartarus and the same sort of a wild, nameless Mongolian horde, this kingdom over here, which we're going to also sort of suppress the importance of, which just so happens to be Russia and China, which just so happens to have their influence on the West Coast severely downplayed. We're given little bones like, well, they built the railroads and things like this, and they were the first ones to be on the coast of California and in the sake of Russia, but we're going to downplay all that. And it just seems to me there's too many similarities with what we call the old kingdom that we kind of suspected existed, and the ties that they had into energy, and this barber pole and Barbaria. And it just is odd to me. I'm not even sure if that was if I explained that very well as far as my thoughts and the direction that they went. But it did get me thinking about this striped pole and what could be the significance of this and why barbers would have it, why they even became to be called barbers in the first place. And so I hunt for these poles here, and I find a great many very interesting things. Now, to me, these almost look like some sort of battery device, and why they would be associated with barbers would be anyone's guess. Here you have in this geographic news this we're told is an American-style barbershop pole, is the word used here to describe this. Note the American type of barbershop pole in the background, they say. This is on a street in Tokyo. Yet I'm not sure what's so American about it, considering there is reports of these poles existing in Old England in the 1600s. And then I discover this. And this is from a book called The Iroquois Eagle Dance. And it's about this ritual that happens involving a striped pole, usually a red and white striped pole. Now, normally that wouldn't really mean much to me, but a little bit further research in this reveals that this pole stands for the Morning Star, or specifically the Morning Star's staff. Morning Star obviously often being associated with both Lucifer and Christ. So that's a very interesting thing that this Native American pole would have this striped pole that stood for being the Morning Star staff. Some of these poles have been found that have copper, that are covered in copper, which is obviously the tie-in with the electricity. This vulva-shaped altar that is a large part of this ritual also has a Morning Star figure with 13 facial stripes, which makes you wonder about this whole 13 colonies story that we're told on these old flags. All the more interesting when you consider that this dance, this ritual, is part of something performed by the Eagle Society, where obviously the symbolism of the eagle is very prevalent. So interesting that here in this early Native American ritual, you have all of the same symbols of the United States, which allegedly came later, the eagle and the 13 stripes and the star. There's another idea around here, around this community, that sometimes surfaces, and that there's this idea that the tree of life here is what springs at the center of the earth. Now, this is an Icelandic, from a Nordic legend from Iceland. This is actually Wikipedia's the front page. This is their image when you search for tree of life. But what I find to be most interesting, and the reason I even chose this picture just at random, is because of this motif here with the tree of life coming from the North Pole. And I don't know if the gatekeepers think it's hilarious to actually put a physical pole, as in like a beam, at the North Pole, or to throw people off from the idea that it's a magnetic pole That's what we're initially talking about. Magnetic pole. And the idea is that this once was a tree of life that sprung here, and it served as marked the magnetic pole, and life springs outward from it, and rivers would flow each direction from its base. Here you have the ring of ice that would signify sort of Antarctica, and here you have this serpent devouring its own tail, sort of as a guardian protecting this realm. But the idea here is this is from Norse mythology. This is recreated. Many different cultures have this tree of life sort of theme. Now, I'm not saying that's what I believe or disbelieve. I'm just saying that this is what the old maps would show. An area here where the rivers flow each direction. Why am I pointing that out, or even bringing that up to begin with? Is because reading further into this eagle society, you find that this striped pole actually represents this tree of life. And you find that, according to their legend, the winds blow in each direction. There's a legend where there's a man who ventures forth and finds this tree of life and determines that it glows during the night with an internal light, and from it in each direction eagles fly, and they represent the wind. So here you have again this tree of life as the North Pole being represented in this Eagle Society's dance and the Iroquois ritual. Then you have this thing, which is at the North Pole, we are told. Now, whether this is actually at the magnetic North Pole is really doubtful, considering there's one of these on the South Pole as well. That there's actually 4 different ones of these. There's a symbolic one, there's a geographical one, there's a magnetic. There's a whole bunch of red herrings thrown around out there to keep people from figuring out what's going on. But now, why would we choose to do a literal red and white striped pole at the North and South? The North Pole makes sense if you're, I guess, propagating the rumor of Santa Claus or whatever, but it makes no sense to do it on the South Pole. Why a red and white striped pole? And can it be just a coincidence that this matches the Iroquois legend of a striped pole being at the center of the axis of the universe? I just find the coincidence between all these things to be suspicious. Other ways I came up with this striped pole is it's also known as a freedom tree. Here you have the French army, the Patriots, declaring war in the Netherlands. And when the water freezes over, the time would be right to attack. And so the French just waltz across the frozen lake, and the Patriots sing and dance around their striped pole freedom tree. Here is a image of the basin, allegedly in 1740, that was used for bloodletting at these barber shops, the barber surgeons. So here it's a medieval practice, and that certainly doesn't look like a type of bowl that one would create in 1740 for bloodletting. It almost looks like a prayer bowl or something. A very ritualistic bowl, not one you'd find in the streets of London in a barber shop. Here you have a man, I find this to be interesting, a 13-foot bamboo pole from Panama planted at the South Pole. They're going to airdrop this thing to put it on a building there. I don't believe that what exists there now is a bamboo pole, but this is from this makes no sense. A pole from Panama being carved in Arkansas at a place called Hope Star. Just kind of interesting side note there on that. And here you have the striped pole that they put at the South Pole allegedly in 1986 with this very Photoshop looking picture of people who are supposedly in the snow at the South Pole. Well, this pole doesn't look like this pole, but we can presume that they've upgraded from bamboo to whatever this is. But why this shape and why this motif over and over again? Is it a coincidence that it is outside of the barber shops and the name barber, the close ties with Barbaria? Is that a coincidence? Is the fact that we use these red and white striped poles, which so resemble this Iroquois legend, and in the legend actually it's explained that this here would be the Middle Earth ground, and underneath it, this designates where we're at now. And this is supposedly the underworld, which spins the opposite direction. And why would we be using this motif to represent a barber surgeon? It just all is very suspicious to me. Now, like I said, I have no idea. I didn't reach any conclusion with this. It's just the way that my thoughts were going, and I didn't even know how to properly explain it. So what do you think? Is this just a big nothing burger? Is this just grabbing at straws where there's nothing there? Or is there something more to this barber pole than we're told? And it, like everything else, is just repackaged and repurposed and just sold back to us as if there's nothing weird at all about having this and only this to signify one trade. I mean, it'd be one thing if every trade in town square had their own symbol. But really, the only ones that I can think of are the barbershop pole and the pawn shop, maybe? I don't know. Even that one's not very well known. So, what do you think? Is there something weird here, or is it all just coincidence? I don't know. I really don't. I'm curious to hear what you all think.